Hello, so I will give you an update on some of the work that we've been doing with the Land Ocean Carbon Transfer project. This is a 6-year project funded by the UK Natural Environment Research Council. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're doing it, what happens across the UK, some of our recent findings, what happens in the Tamar, and finally, I was going to ask you for some help or some insight about this mystery of the Coalbrook. So why monitor the land-ocean carbon flux? So what we have here is a little cartoon of the global carbon cycle perturbation since the Industrial Revolution. And the numbers here represent billion tons of carbon per year moving between different compartments of the Earth system. And what I want to draw your attention to is this number that I've circled here in red, this nearly 1 billion tons of carbon that are moving from the land into the ocean. And if you think of this whole system as a series of interconnecting sort of tubes, if we change this flow of carbon from land to the ocean, we might expect an increase of flow of carbon from the air into the ocean. And this would reduce the rate of atmospheric CO2 increase, which would kind of help with mitigate global warming. So UK-wide, we have calculated the annual flux of carbon from land to the ocean, and this came out at just over 1 million tons of carbon per year. And what you see here on this map on the right is the loss of carbon from the landscape. And what you can see, the darker colors correspond to where we have mainly peat and forestry. So it really correlated with those types of environments. So you see in the far north of Scotland where there's a lot of peat, in Snowdonia in Wales. And down here by us, you can see that Dartmoor is showing up in darker colors. So that means more export of carbon from these type of landscapes. Now on the Tamar, we have collected data monthly at 23 different sites. So there's 14 across the catchment, which is seen in the figure on the right-hand side, 8 in the estuary, and 1 at our long-term monitoring site in the English Channel. And we collected various parameters there with inorganic nutrients, nitrates, organic carbon, pH, as well as sort of meteorological information. And compared to the rest of the UK, the Tamar is quite average. So we have some old organic carbon from Dartmoor, some fresher carbon from agriculture, and additional inputs from towns and cities, and algae in the estuary. Now, the bottom figure here shows just 2 properties of this organic carbon. It doesn't matter what they are for the purpose of this, we'll skip that. But you see that the Tamar, which is the red dot, sits pretty much in the middle of all the rivers that we sampled. So the question is, what is the fate of this organic carbon? And most of the organic carbon that comes down the river is remineralized in the estuary or close inshore on mud flats. And it ends up as greenhouse gases, so that's carbon dioxide and methane. And we're actually measuring methane and carbon dioxide in the air at Penlee Point, which is at the mouth of the estuary. And we see the highest concentrations of both of these gases on an ebbing tide and when the wind is blowing from the north. So that means that these gases are produced in the estuary because actually the concentrations in the river are lower than we find in the estuary. So locate is primarily about carbon, but we measured other parameters in order to get contextual information. And what I'm showing here is the nitrate and phosphate, nitrate on the left, phosphate on the right, in the Tamar and Dart catchment. Now in the Dart, we only measured at the bottom of the catchment, whereas in the Tamar, we've got data distributed at different sites across the catchment, like I said earlier. And it won't surprise you to see that the concentration of these nutrients are higher in the west and north of the Tamar catchment, where we have more sort of agricultural land use, and these nutrients are associated with fertilizer application. So this gives us some sort of contextual information with which we can interpret the carbon data that we have. Finally, I wanted to ask for some help here with this mystery of the Coalbrook. So the Coalbrook is one of our 4 Dartmoor sites, the others being the Cadover Bridge, Maryvale and Hillbridge, where we sampled the Plym, the Walkham and the Tavy respectively. And whilst these 4 sites, so those 3 plus Coalbrook, group together quite nicely and are separate and distinct from the more agricultural sites in the west and north of the catchment. Nevertheless, Coalbrook does stand out within this little group as having high nitrate, high silicate, high pH and conductivity, and at the same time low organic carbon. So a number of parameters that we've looked at are quite different there. So this is an aerial shot from Google of the Coalbrook sampling site, marked by the red arrow. And just to the left of that, you can just about make out the village of Peter Tavy. The Coalbrook is actually the river, the stream that runs through Peter Tavy. And upstream from our sampling site, you can see a sort of patchwork of fields, a couple of farms, some more land. I would say in general, it doesn't look particularly different from any of the other sort of Dartmoor sites that we are sampling regularly from this perspective. Now, what we're going to do in the next couple of days actually is we're going to go and sample further upstream and see whether we can actually relate these parameters to a specific point source, or whether they are just coming from right from the source of the river. Finally, in terms of next steps, where we are now is this project finishes in at the end of March. And at the moment, what we're doing is we're synthesizing some of the methane data from the estuary, trying to quantify the flux. Andy Rees is leading that at PML. And we're looking at a synthesis of the carbon data from river to sea. And that's where this plot is here on the left. It's a little bit too complicated to explain in the time that we have, but we're looking at sort of end member mixing between the Tamar, which is the red dot near the bottom left, and algal organic matter also in the bottom left, with marine data at the towards the top right, or sort of in the middle. And we're looking at different processes that modify the organic carbon as these 3 different end members mix. Following on from Locate, we are hoping to start a new project which is called Clean and Green Agriculture. Again, that is funded by the UK Natural Environment Research Council. That will be starting in April. And that the emphasis there is on the agricultural soils, but we will carry on with some of the monitoring that we're doing in the estuary, and hopefully on Dartmoor as well. Okay, I will leave it there. I'm happy to take questions.